How's this look? Am I in there?
Well, I think you both look fine.
Well, thank you. All right, so Jeff Tilley, David Castle.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm an associate research professor here at DRI, and I run the weather modification program. And as part of that, we do operational cloud seeding here in the Sierra and in Colorado during the months of November through April. We also participate in an effort in Wyoming by doing trace chemical analysis of snow, water, and soil samples for that project, partly to not only validate whether the cloud seeding itself is actually having the effect that we want it to in producing additional snow in the areas that we sample, but also just to add to the growing volume of information that basically says that cloud seeding is a safe practice. The amounts of silver iodide that we add to the environment are extremely small over the course of a given season.
So you say that you only cloud seed from which months?
November through April.
So what are the planes spraying during the summer months? Because I've noticed there's still the same cloud seeding remnants. Most people call them chemtrails.
Those are total misnomers.
What does that mean?
What you have, no one is doing any sort of cloud seeding during the summer months in the Sierra. What you see coming across the sky in terms of a trail is what's called a condensation trail. It really is just water vapor that is a result of the air exhaust from a jet engine mixing with the ambient environment. And so anytime you have a jet flying overhead and the conditions are right in terms of the moisture, you'll get a contrail. It doesn't matter whether it's a day like today, totally clear, whether it's cloudy and they're flying up above the clouds that you can see, or even below the clouds you can see. You can get condensation trails anytime from any normal jet aircraft. There's no chemicals in them. It's just water vapor.
How long does it take for those to dissipate?
Depends on the relative humidity, and actually also on whether there's waves in the atmosphere that can act to dissipate them, or even allow them to manifest themselves for longer periods of time.
So what would a rough estimate be?
Anywhere from a half hour to an hour and a half or so.
So why do I see during all months of the year the planes flying and making like X formations and even double, like a bunch of crosses, and then they take over and then they form into clouds and they'll form a haze over the whole sky? Those aren't condensation trails.
Well, they are. Actually, under really the right conditions and the plane's flying high enough in the atmosphere, if it's close enough to the saturation point, and particularly of ice, not of water, those condensation trails can actually stay in the air and spread out and form an entire shield of high cirrus clouds. The crossing is not a pattern that is planned. That's just part of the normal air traffic pattern across western Nevada. You have planes that pass over Reno that are going in and out of Southern California destinations. You've got other planes that are going to San Francisco, other planes that are going from points in the south and southwest to the Pacific Northwest. Reno is quite a crossroads of a lot of air traffic routes, particularly at very high altitudes. And so, yes, you might see crisscrossing, but what you're seeing is just two jets that are going at different altitudes.
Well, it seems very intentional sometimes, as if, and I've also seen it where they'll be leaving a contrail, and then it'll stop once they get to one of the parts with another contrail, and then it'll stop, and then they'll gap the cloud, and they won't spray, and then they'll continue spraying as if they're trying to add to the cloud.
Okay, but they're not spraying. There's no spraying involved at all, ever.
Then how are they turning off their engines mid-flight? I don't
What
see
happens
why the
is
condensation would stop.
it all depends on the ability of the atmosphere to mix, and what the conditions of the atmosphere immediately around the plane at the time that it's flying through. Because the entire contrail process is a mixing process. Whenever you get up, say in the middle of the night, and you might drive around and you see, say, fog near a lake, you're getting a similar type of a mixing process. You that fog may actually extend across a roadway. You drive through that fog, you dissipate it, but it might not be dissipated for very long. It might be a process where it only stays dissipated for a moment or so, and then the mixing of the turbulent effects actually recreate the fog in that same location. When you have contrails that appear to stop where they intersect another trail, that's really, you're looking at two different altitudes.
It's kind of unexplainable to me when they seem like they're at the same altitude and then they stop spraying.
But how can you tell they're at the same altitude?
Well, it just appears that way. I guess there's no way.
From your perspective, you look up, your eye can only distinguish altitudes to a certain degree based upon what you can naturally see. You can have an overlap of two contrails. They may be 1,000, 2,000 feet apart. Your eye's not going to be able to tell that difference. It's just not sensitive enough of an instrument to be able to do that.
But why would the trail stop and then continue again when it seems like it's still traveling at the same altitude?
Because
it seems like they're like flicking a switch and then flicking it again to make it stop and then go again.
On aircraft that are doing approaches and takeoff, there may be times where they shut an engine off and turn it back on for a particular reason. That may be related to the presence of waves in the atmosphere. The waves themselves may cause the pattern to change. And again, it's all about mixing. You get a little bit of drier air that mixes in that's too dry. That's the key. The key is the difference in temperature and the difference in the moisture content of the air that's actually mixing. And you have to have that mixture work just right for you to get saturated conditions, no matter what.
Interesting. Let me grab something out of my bag here. I prepared some questions. Actually, I'm just going to get this over here. So, what you're saying is there's no such thing.
Are those all your questions?
Yeah.
He won't have time for all of them.
I was going to say, I do have to get home at about 10 at night.
So let me just confirm this. You're saying there's no such thing as chemtrails, and that's just a conspiracy theory?
It is a conspiracy theory.
And there's no credibility whatsoever to anything these people are recording, any of the photographs, none of the movies, nothing is scientifically credible?
In terms of anything contemporary, yes, that's correct.
Could you elaborate on contemporary? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, there have been documented times in the past, and that they were in wartime, and you can go and find any number of websites that will talk about things that were done during the Vietnam War and perhaps other wars before that. In terms of the weather modification community, there is no such thing as chemtrails. It does not exist.
Well, what are they spraying out of the planes then?
They're not. And again, they're not spraying. They're in fact.
So it's natural condensation trails. Then why wasn't this happening back in the 80s or the 60s?
Because it was. And people just didn't pay attention to it then.
Why are people paying attention now?
I can't answer that. There are people who have been trying to come up with conspiracy theories.
You think it's for their own profit?
Sometimes
or do you think it's because they feel like there's some sort of secret operation which we're not being told about, which is going on right above our heads, and we're seeing it every day, and we're concerned about it. We just want some real answers, and we feel like everyone's giving us the go-around and not giving us any real answers.
Well, I'm giving you the real answers. I mean, there are no such things as chemtrails being sprayed out of planes.
Interesting.
What you see is condensation trails.
How
They've been
are the
there.
clouds seeded?
What's that?
How are the clouds seeded?
Clouds are seeded with flares. And the flares are burned when we do aircraft seeding, and that is different than what he's talking about in terms of spraying something. One thing we would never seed in any conditions like this. This is totally non-productive to do cloud seeding. Where we do aircraft cloud seeding is in conditions where you have a storm system, it's coming over the Sierra, you have a complete wall of clouds, you have supercooled water in those clouds, and the point of the flares is putting silver iodide into the clouds specifically to increase the efficiency of the cloud precipitation process, so you'll get more snow and more water to the user.
Do you think that weather modification is necessary?
In the West, I think it is absolutely necessary, particularly under scenarios of climate climate change that include an increase in the frequency of drought conditions.
So it used to be global warming, but now people call it climate change. Why did it change?
Well, I've always called it climate change. Global warming that is one possible type of climate change. You can have an increased frequency in drought occur, in theory, without having any change in temperature. You can have changes in temperature without an increase in frequency of drought. You can have, and that change in temperature can be positive or negative. You can have changes in temperature that go to a wetter climate. There's all sorts of scenarios that are out there. So I prefer to refer to climate change, and specifically in terms of justification for weather modification and increasing weather modification efforts is an increase in the frequency of drought, such as California and Nevada and much of the West have experienced for the past several years.
So what I know about weather modification, or not weather modification, climate change, is that it's caused by an increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. Is that correct?
That's not the only possible process. That's anthropogenic climate change that you're referring to. There are forcings such as greenhouse gas forcings that can be traced to some degree to anthropogenic effects, but there's also natural climate variability.
Could you elaborate? What does anthropogenic effects mean?
That's man-made. Man-made, anthropogenic is a synonym for man-made.
Is it possible that weather modification is actually making climate change worse?
I would say no, and the reason I say no is that we operate on much smaller spatial scales than the processes that can contribute to climate change.
So weather modification has no effect whatsoever on climate change?
I would say because the amount of energy that it takes to actually affect climate change in terms of the general circulation and the global circulation of the climate is orders of magnitude more than the types of energy changes that we basically put into play in doing any sort of cloud seeding, because cloud seeding is on a very small space and time scale at any given time. Even if you have multiple cloud seeding efforts going on in different parts of the West, you're still talking overall energy change to the climate system that is orders of magnitude less, and multiple orders of magnitude less than the amount of energy it takes to cause a change in the circulation, even a change where you have an increasing frequency of what we call an atmospheric ridge aloft, higher pressure extending through the whole atmospheric column. To change a pattern like we've had much of this winter, which is this ridge right off the west coast or over the west coast, to a pattern where you have an area of low pressure all the way through the atmospheric column. That takes, again, multiple orders of magnitudes more energy to make even that change than any sum of cloud seeding operations.
What you're saying is you're not spraying enough stuff in order to have an effect on the climate?
Okay, again,
you don't spray anything.
We don't spray. Everything.
Who sprays?
Nobody
Who's
sprays.
spraying the aluminum, strontium, and barium?
Nobody.
Nobody? Then why is aluminum, strontium, and barium being found in unusual amounts all over the West, especially, but all over the world?
Well, strontium is a natural crustal element, first of all.
Well, as is aluminum.
To a degree. Strontium is more so. And the fact, so you get any sort of wind erosion, any sort of wind aeolian process, the dust. You go north of town to, you drive past Cold Springs Valley on 395. You see the dry lake bed, you see the wind and the turbulence kicking up dust. That dust is actually very ubiquitous in terms of being transported not only throughout the West, but that can be transported globally. And there have been a number of recent studies that have quantified to certain degrees and not just studies that you see put on an internet website. These are in science.
So you're saying that their
nature.
tests must be like contaminated or something? Are they not properly taken?
It's very hard to take long-range transport into account. What is known from...
What about stuff that falls from the sky and they just scoop it out of, like, say, a stagnant puddle of water?
Where does it come
They
from?
find the film. It comes from the sky, from what
But where
being
does
sprayed.
it come? But where does it come? What? No, it doesn't
It's
come from
aerosols.
being sprayed.
It's being
Aerosols.
aerosols are being sprayed out of airplanes and covering the sky. It's chemtrails.
No, it's
Are you
not.
familiar with the movie What in the World Are They Spraying? Have you ever heard of that? Has anyone ever come in here to talk to you about that?
I am well acquainted with what you're talking about, and what I am saying.
So not all of it's false. Everything in that movie is completely wrong. Has no
I
credibility
have not
whatsoever.
seen the entire movie. I've heard people talk about sections of the movie.
Why haven't
so,
you watched the movie if you're into weather modification? That's what it's all about.
No, it's not.
You haven't seen the movie. How do you know what it's about?
Because you just told me what it's about.
I just said it. What are you talking about, man? Come on.
No, you
You-
could.
Can we be honest? Can I show you some videos on the internet of
Please,
cloud
please,
seeding?
please. Any video you show me on the internet of cloud seeding is probably not going to be real.
That's not true. How could you say that?
Because you don't have a proper concept of what cloud seeding is. You keep coming back to it time and time again.
Well, actually, I'm not talking about cloud seeding. I'm talking about chemtrails. So can I show you videos of
Chemtrails and cloud seeding are not the same thing.
So are you saying chemtrails do exist?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying chemtrails are a fictitious construct that have
So they're fake.
I am saying that they do not exist in the weather modification community.
But they exist in the sky. They
No.
exist in Carson City and Reno and Las Vegas and LA and San Francisco
Right,
and
well,
states all across the world. I mean, all across the country, and they also in
And I'm
other
saying
countries.
those are condensation trails.
What makes you so sure that they're condensation trails and
Because
it's not
we have
aluminum,
studied-
strontium, or barium?
Because we have studied condensation trails as a field. The field of atmospheric scientists, meteorologists, there has actually been quite a volume of research on condensation trails. We know what's in them. There have actually been measurements taken of the trails as they've been produced. And so we know that they're water vapor with a tiny, tiny amount of carbon dioxide. Aluminum, strontium, and barium can be picked up from dust. They can be picked up from car emissions. They're common.
So it has nothing to do with planes spraying
That's right.
aerosols.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Are there any laws against spraying the sky with chemicals?
I do not know of all possible jurisdictions, so
Do you think there should be?
I don't think I can comment on that because that's,
If somebody was spraying the
That's
sky
not
with
in
aluminum,
that's not
strontium,
my
and barium,
purview.
would you approve of it morally?
aluminum, and strontium, again, are natural elements that are found
What
in...
about
in
barium?
Barium's a little tricky. There are certain parts of the world where you find more barium in the atmosphere, but it's mostly as an industrial pollutant. And that's the key. This is the
So
key.
why would people find that in places which have no industry, such as by Mount Shasta?
Because there are long-range transport of aerosols from Asia to the West Coast. This is documented.
It's the Chinese, huh?
Well, but the fact is, it also goes... Every industrial nation and all the industrial pollutants that are in the atmosphere can circulate the globe within each hemisphere. It's hard for them to cross hemispheres. It has happened, and it does happen.
So you think that's what happened in the case of Mount Shasta and these other places where people have found traces of barium, strontium, and
Well, you're going to find aluminum in the crust anyway, because it's a natural crustal element. You'll find strontium as well, tiny bits of barium, but you also have you have a lot of ways that you can stir up the Earth's crust. Anytime there's road construction, you stir up the Earth's crust. Anytime there is anyone going off-road on any of these dry lake beds or anywhere where you stir up dust, that dust contains aluminum, strontium, and in certain parts of the world, tiny bits of barium. And that's a function of how barium's distributed in the Earth's crust, which is not something I'm an expert in. But it does have a distribution. There's an awful lot of airborne transport of aerosols.
Why wouldn't weather modification be taught in an atmospheric science class? Because I was in an atmospheric science class, and I asked my teacher about it, and he had no idea what I was talking about. He actually called me a conspiracy theorist for knowing that we're able to modify the weather. Now, do you know why it's not known at all by people who are actually trained in meteorology?
Well, okay, first of all, I take exception to that because I am trained in meteorology. I have a PhD. You can see right up there on the wall from Penn State. I have a meteorology degree. Second, there are curricula in this country where weather modification is discussed and taught. University of North Dakota has a course in it.
But why does it make you a conspiracy theorist for knowing about weather modification in some people's eyes?
I can't explain that. People will believe what they want to believe. Sometimes even
Well,
when
it's not a matter of faith, it's fact. It's something real that's going on.
Well, but it doesn't matter in terms of conspiracy theories or not. The fact of the matter is, people will believe what they want to believe as long as they want to believe it. And you can confront them with facts and they will still believe what they want to believe. Some people you will never convince.
I agree. What is stratosphere aerosol geoengineering?
I am, as a weather modification person, we do not deal with anything that is considered geoengineering. And
could you elaborate? What's the difference between weather modification and geoengineering?
Scale. Geoengineering, as
they're the ones spraying the aerosols, right?
I don't know what geoengineers do, and I'm not going to comment on that because I don't.
Where can I find a geoengineer?
I don't know. That's a very good question.
The director of weather modification doesn't know anything about geoengineering?
I know a small bit about geoengineering, but...
Could you explain to me what you know? Or plans for geoengineering if it's not already in effect?
We have no plans for geoengineering. That's not something...
You at the DRI?
That's correct. I have no desire to participate in geoengineering efforts.
Just weather modification?
That's correct. Then they are different.
What's the difference?
I just told you. It's the scale.
Scale. So you only want to create weather on a local level, and geoengineering wants to do it throughout the whole Earth.
That is, or maybe not the whole Earth, perhaps, but
there's countries that allow it. Countries that won't blow us up if we spray things over their country.
I can't comment on that. I don't know what people who do geoengineering actually do. I only know a little bit of what I have read in terms of the scientific literature.
Have you heard of David Wise? I believe he's one of the biggest geoengineers. I think that's his name.
I have heard of him, but I have not read any of his work.
Well, his plan, what he says is he wants to spray nanoparticles of, he says, aluminum into the sky, and he wants to create sort of a blanket encompassing the Earth like an envelope to reflect the sun's rays in order to stop global warming so we get less sun.
I can't comment on that.
You know nothing about that?
I really don't.
What are the drones going to be used for?
The drones are intended to be used as another delivery system for the silver iodide for cloud seeding that we do on our scale that we do it on.
How big is your scale, and is it only silver iodide and no aluminum whatsoever or strontium or barium?
It's only silver iodide.
How could you be sure, though? Have you seen them load up the planes with the chemicals?
I know what is in the types of flares that we will use on the drones.
So it's strictly flares and no aerosols whatsoever?
That is, at the present time, that is what we...
Do you plan on using aerosols in the future?
Well, everything is an aerosol. The point is we burn...
So they are aerosols?
We burn flares, yes, but all aerosols are not created equal.
Okay. So it is an aerosol.
There are aerosols in this room.
Okay, but there's not
there
the aerosols in this room
coming
aren't
out.
sprayed in
There
the
are aerosols
atmosphere.
coming in and out of your nose right now.
So you're not familiar with stratosphere aerosol geoengineering?
I am not.
Do you know? And you don't know anybody who is. And chemtrails are not real. Okay. What is HAARP and what does it have to do with cloud seeding?
HAARP has absolutely nothing to do with cloud seeding.
Do you know what HAARP? Could you explain to me what HAARP is?
Well, HAARP stands for High Altitude Auroral Research Program. And, I can refer you to people that I know at the University of Alaska Fairbanks who can tell you much more about HAARP than I can.
Okay, could you just tell me what you know? I don't have time to go to Alaska.
Well, okay, but there's no point in me going beyond a lot of what I know. I know it is a project that was originally formed to develop better ways of researching. Let me rephrase that. It's probably the best way of putting it is it's a research program to better understand what goes on in the aurora and maybe some new techniques of analyzing auroral data to just better understand the physical
Why would somebody want to better understand the aurora?
Because the aurora aurora actually represents energy. It basically represents a response to solar energy that impacts the upper atmosphere, and that energy is part of the natural environment. And understanding all parts of the natural environment is important to understanding how the entire Earth system works.
Do you think the reason chemtrails and cloud seeding are not talked about is because of the possible health effects?
First of all,
Chemtrails are not real.
well, second of all, cloud seeding, if you would have, I've given 30 some odd interviews on cloud seeding in the last 6 months. The fact, if you're saying that it's not talked about, that means you haven't watched any of those, or you haven't been paying attention.
Well, I mean, talked about in like the media or in school.
The media is who I gave all the interviews to. Where have you been? Obviously, you've not been paying attention.
I've been doing research on chemtrails. I don't know
Okay,
where
well,
you've
guess
been.
what? I think we've had enough time.
All right, you sure?
Yeah, we're sure.
Are you angry with me?
I think you came here under false pretenses. You're trying to get me to say something that I'm not going to say, and as a result,
That's the end of that.
that's the end of that.
Oh, please don't touch my camera. Oh, thank you, sir.
No.
But do thank you for.
Yeah, but thank you for the interview. That was just happened.
I have no idea, but you got to get me out of here. I believe this is the way we came. Wait, he's locked us in the courtyard.
All right, so we're just.
What do you think we are, David?
We're at the DRI. We just got done talking to Jeff Tilley, and he got really pissed about chemtrails. I don't know why.
Well, when you're in that field, I mean, not in that field.
He's clearly not, or else he wouldn't get so mad. Fuck, I seriously don't know how to get out of here.
I think we have
What's that?
to. Well, maybe that's our taxi cab.
We're stuck in DRI and we don't know how to get out.
Well, we don't have any oars, so we're gonna have to walk.
Should we steal this van? Look, they're spraying fucking chemtrails out of the van too. Look at that shit.
I would, but I'm gonna speak about breaking your camera. I do believe we're gated in. If we go in and apologize, you think he'll let us leave?
I want to go. We got to go back in there and ask him how to get out. Excuse me, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff, old buddy, old pal. Good to you. See here.
Oh, dude, we got to take the long way now.
Well, I don't think Jeff's gonna give us a ride.
I don't think Jeff's gonna give us a ride either. Excuse me. Do you know how we get back in the building?
We got. How do we get there?
You guys filming for the Cloud City?
Yeah.
Great. My name's Justin Brilli. I'm the public information officer.
Hi.
All right.
How's it going?
Good, Eddie Hannon.
You just talked to Jeff?
No, I'm just coming over here to check on a few other things, and I just knew you guys were on campus, and I just wanted to see if I could catch you. And
Well, you know, I think Jeff got a little mad at us back there. We were trying to talk about chemtrails, and he kept saying it was not real, and he doesn't know anything about it, and he got a little emotional and threw us out. So. Really.
okay. What's
You
the
know
video?
what
But he hasn't told us which way to go.
Yeah.
What's the
we're
video
stuck now.
for?
It's I'm an independent filmmaker. I'm making a movie.
For what?
Just because I felt like I just want to do it.
He's been going to school down at the Western Community College.
So
Okay.
bad. And then I felt like I was being lied to about everything, so I decided to make
school.
my own movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
About what's going on.
Okay. Who else have you interviewed? If you don't mind me asking.
Pretty much just Jeff at this
Okay.
point. But what I'm doing, it's a different kind of movie.
Do you have a storyboard or prospectus or anything I might be able to glance at? Or
Well, what I'm doing is I've written a bunch of lines and I've written a bunch of songs. And what I do is I go around and I give each person a line and they just say one line.
okay.
And then it comes together and I film another person saying a line.
Okay.
And they'll
Do you
come
have a
together and
card
make a poem.
Or website or anything I can take a look at?
No,
Or get
well,
your name
it's
or-
my name's David Castle.
okay. David
The
Castle.
movie's called Language is Art.
Okay. Castle like the building.
Yeah.
TLE.
And do you know anything about chemtrails? Is that just a kooky conspiracy theory? Or is there some credibility to that? You know anything
I'm
about
not
it?
able to speak on it.
Can anybody here talk about
Does
it?
anyone talk? Because clearly it's real, man. We see it every day.
Are you filming? The red light's on.
I have no idea. I don't even operate these things.
Yeah, it is. Do you not want to talk about it on camera?
I'm not willing to speak about it, so.